I've said for a long time, networking is one of those weird things where boring is good, right? As long as things are working and it gets a little bit faster with every refresh, nobody really cares. But we have turned a corner in a lot of cases because now the network, more than ever, is very important to the way that we do things. But is it really? Because I feel like a lot of people are saying we need more speed, we need more capability, but they don't really. In fact, a lot of these folks would probably be way better off if someone would just turn that networking over to someone else. And if you watched the podcast that we put out prior to this event, the one that actually came out today, you probably saw our thoughts on outsourcing. But I want to take this one step further. Networking needs to evolve. Either you need to let someone else run your just good enough network and keep it operational, or you have to put the effort in and make your network the centerpiece, make it the product that you're selling, not just a delivery mechanism. So I'm going to open this floor up and I'm going to start with Chris, because Chris is the one who I was having this conversation with. And you obviously have thoughts around this because you are heavily involved in AutoCon and the Network Automation Forum. And so you've seen these people try to push this narrative that the way to make networks evolve is to use network automation. So what are your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, well, I think that's accurate. I think that, and this is using network automation as a pretty large blanket term. I think what we're talking about is the evolution of network operations, right? So the way I look at it is we're in this third era of networking. So the first era was, does this work, right? Can this work? And that was, we're talking about like the 50s, 60s, like we're like inventing TCP/IP and figuring out and like learning that that was going to be the protocol that actually worked for a worldwide interconnected network, right? And then we got there, right? And we got to a point where like, okay, this pretty much works, right? And then the next era was, how can we make it work better? Which I think was more about user experience. And this is, taking us from, okay, we have internet service that's possible, we have network service that's possible, to, okay, now you've got, an expectation for network connectivity everywhere, even, 700 miles an hour or 30,000 feet.
Yeah.
Which was crazy at the beginning of my career, right? And is now just like, oh yeah, of course. And I think now what I mean by this third era is we need to make the operator experience better. Right? So we got the user experience pretty good, right? Most people just kind of forget that the network's there. They just expect it to work all the time. It's really weird if it doesn't work, as you were saying. And now we need to kind of take that lens, I think, to the operator experience. And I think that means automation in some form, right? It means operating networks as a system. It means operating network using software. It means, using tools instead of just, hand jamming configs into individual devices all over the place all the time.
But let me jump onto that point, because you say that we need to make the operator experience better by adding automation. And I know for a fact through all the panels that I sat on 8-9 years ago that automation is going to take my job away. And it's going to make things so much more difficult to work on. And you're making my life a nightmare by telling me I have to do all of this stuff to make the network repeatable just to put me out of a job. Why would you do that to me, Chris?
Well, but so it can't be all those things at once, right? Because either you're doing...
No, that's what I was told. It's all of those things at once.
Right.
It is Schrodinger's network. It's both complex and simple. It's both making me do more work and putting me out of a job. I don't own any cats that are going in boxes like that. How does this work?
Yeah. Well, so I think there is more work to be done, right? And so we're talking about almost every network that I've ever touched, whether it was as an employee or as a consultant, has been underdocumented or misdocumented, right? And so that's one of the first things, that there is a huge amount of work out there.
I think people would kill for underdocumentation.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I'm thinking undocumented.
Because these tools, like what we just saw from Aviz this morning, like these tools don't work without the data.
Right.
And so I don't think this is like eliminating any jobs. I think it's potentially over time making the job more valuable, right? Making the job easier. And I think the decision here isn't necessarily for an organization, at the organization level. It's not, do we need automation? Is the network a differentiator in our business enough that we need to build automation capabilities in-house? Or is my network truly just a commodity, just a utility, and I should let someone else focus on that who's really good at it?
And I think that is part of the core conversation that we need to be having, is we have to make a decision on this. How important is my network? And I'm going to say this to all of my wonderful friends out there. Turn up your headphones.
How about your not wonderful friends?
Well, those two, because I'm about to make some of those. Do not listen to salespeople when they tell you how valuable your network is, because they're going to try to convince you that it's just valuable enough for them to be able to make that boat payment next month. And you know what? I realize that you only have 10 users in your office, but you really need this wireless controller system with Wi-Fi 7 APs that broadcast in every possible radio range, because your 2-room office needs the best possible automated connectivity. And I hope a lot of you out there are shaking your heads and saying, why? Why? Because we have convinced people that they need that. And that's the way that tech goes, right? Anybody who's ever waited with bated breath for the next iPhone or Samsung Galaxy phone to be released with a whole bunch of features that you're never going to use. Yes, I have to buy the Pro model every year because it has the best titanium coated sapphire crystal lens programmatic camera that I take maybe 3 pictures a week with. But it's the race, right? I have to have the biggest and the best. And we're not just doing this from a sales cycle. We're doing this with supported case studies. Anybody in here remember that time when everybody kept talking about how Netflix was a tech company? They're a tech company, not a media and entertainment empire that delivers media to you. They're differentiating on their network. They're talking about how they're leveraging CDNs for delivery and things like that. And I don't hear a lot of conversation today.
Well, I think that's the key point, though. I think it's not importance versus unimportant. I think that the network is fundamental. Like none of this stuff works without the network.
We're not saying you can get away without having one.
Is it different, right? Does the network make your product or service different? Not even necessarily better, but does it have an impact on what you're selling to your customers in a way that you need to differentiate your network and build it differently? And if not, then it's not that network engineers' jobs are going to go away, but they may shift, right? More towards service providers, MSPs, that kind of thing.
Anyone else? Thoughts on this?
I mean, the network is, I think, fundamental in the same way that electricity is fundamental. And the ultimate metric by which the power grid is defined as uptime, right? Network is uptime. That's the differentiation, is whether or not it works constantly and all the time and there's never any issues. Where I see where you're talking about going with, a Nile or whoever, is this a differentiator? Can you live with an hour of downtime every couple of months? Like, I don't know. Some companies, yeah, that's no problem. Other companies, absolutely not.
And to quickly define for everybody at home, when he mentioned Nile, he's talking about a class of providers that are offering something called network as a service. We've talked to a couple of them here at Tech Field Day before, Nile, Secure, and Meter. There's also a third, Ramen. Ramen, we'd love to see you at a future Field Day event. But the idea is that they come in and they actually deploy all the equipment for you in the same vein as a managed service provider, and they handle the network for you.
Yeah, and I don't want to pick on them and say that they're bad or they're going to give you downtime or anything like that. I don't mean that. But what I do mean is that there is you're paying for a level of service there, and the more you outsource, the less you control that level of uptime.
But are you guaranteed to have that much uptime if you don't use them?
No, but there is, there's definitely diminishing returns, obviously, but in general, the more you pay, the more experts that you have running your network, the more you can kind of, I won't say guarantee, but hopefully improve your uptime, right?
There's a lot of companies that spend a lot of money that still have downtime.
I'm not saying it's perfect.
Every one of those nines in the decimal point triples the cost of your network.
Yeah.
And past a certain point, there's a reason why nobody quotes like 7 nines. Is because that's literally, it's always up.
Absolutely.
But even there, you have that conversation of, well, why does my network need to be up all the time? Netflix's does, because Netflix delivers content 24/7. The Whataburger network, they could probably go without it for like an hour from 2 to 3 when nobody's buying their food, right? Even though they're open 24 hours. Like, there's programmatic downtime. Like Chris brought up, like, I don't need to be connected to the world 24/7. If the Wi-Fi on the plane doesn't work, am I annoyed? Yeah, but it's not the end of the world.
Happy.
But let's take that a step further. What if the plane was suddenly like streaming telemetry? Because that's something we've talked about a lot, right? Is how could you lose a plane over the ocean? Shouldn't it be telling people where it's at? Planes don't stream telemetry. They actually data dump when they land. But if suddenly that streaming telemetry and it doesn't have 100% uptime, somebody's going to get mad.
But, it's like I think about in healthcare, what the CIO that I worked for, he said, hey, it's never going to stop that interaction with that patient in front of you. You're still going to give the care. Even if the systems are down, you're still going to give that care. So that 5 nines thing, kind of goes out the door a little bit. But at the same time, that same doctor is screaming and yelling at you, telling you that the system's down. So in terms of we talk about, commodity too, and we talk about uptime, isn't uptime just part of that, level of service? So more back to kind of the point, does this all have to be kind of homogenized and delivered as a product, as a service versus customized for that business to exist?
But a lot of it is already homogenized, right? Yeah. How many of you guys are running ArcNet at home? Token ring? Fitty. Please tell me somebody's got a Fitty ring. Fitty. Thank you, Dan. Now, we've homogenized this. When I started my networking career many years ago, I was still installing serial lines, right? I still had to go out and install T1s and DS3s. And now we don't do that anymore. I would argue that SD-WAN only exists because we standardized on Ethernet as CPE. There's no way that a Velo box or a Viptela box would have worked if we would have had to, clock source line the card in it. But by Chris,
it'd at least be more expensive.
That's true. It would be a lot more expensive. Yeah. But as we moved to that point where the components became a lot more homogeneous, are you going to tell the person, okay, the blue cable needs to go into the one marked serial, and the orange cable needs to go into the one marked Ethernet, and they're going to go, but they're the same cable, right? Yeah. We've made it easier to do those things, but we've just moved where the complexity lives in the network, because now if everything is Ethernet, there's other challenges to solve.
Can you use a straight through or crossover? You don't ask the question anymore.
No.
Right.
Because we just assume that the switch is smart enough to understand when it needs to cross. Yeah. And I can still remember walking into the bowels of the IBM plant in Rochester, Minnesota, trying to find a crossover cable to wire a switch underneath my desk. And there was it was a speakeasy. There's a door that slides up. I was like, what do you want? Crossover cable. Who sent you? But that's the thing is,
it's supposed to be orange.
We do these things because we want to make the network survivable. We talk about uptime. We talk about reliability for our clients. Healthcare is a very interesting example when you think about it, because the doctors, even though they kind of work for the hospital, they don't really work for the hospital. They're independent contractors in a way, and they're your client base that are really mad when the network doesn't work. And you would say, yes, patient care matters. I will say that a lot of nurses that I know, if their little rolling cart doesn't operate, the level of care is impacted. Maybe they're still going to care for that person, but look at the fact you've got to scan the bracelet, you've got to scan the medication, you got to double check the dose, you have to use the smart card to verify that you were the person that actually gave this dosing. Why? Legal mandates. If something happens and you get the wrong dose of medication, they have to be able to audit that trail all the way back to figure out what screwed up. And so a lot of this is being mandated to us through those methods.
I mean, it's a spectrum, right? I mean, fundamentally, I think that there's no easy answer, because it depends on the business you're in, depends on the criticality of communications, depends on how digitized you are and how dependent on that digital infrastructure you are. And based on that, as a business, you decide, where you need to run your network. And at the same time, that's the demand side. On the supply side, you have, your NILs, your meters, your ramens coming in, and they're not new, because we had managed service providers before. The communication service providers, the AT&T and Verizon, would sell you managed network services. So
yeah, but how good were they?
Yeah, it's not BT. I mean, it's not new, right? So you had that already. But then as a business owner or as a CIO, you're making a decision, given the business you're in, given the unique nature of your communications infrastructure, given your cost and the ability to recruit and retain, what's the right answer at this point in time through the evolution? Because both are evolving at the same time, right? Your demand needs are changing, supply needs are changing. And now when something goes down, we don't worry. My wife doesn't care if my Wi-Fi goes down. Takes the phone and turns on tethering, and then everything's up.
She has a backup plan when she didn't even realize.
Well, she realizes clearly, because
my friend Jeff Fry, Jeff, shout out to you, buddy, was talking about the fact that he just found out that T-Mobile offers a $20 a month survivable backup system, and it's only designed to carry a certain amount of data, but it can fail immediately, right? Because you have 2 WAN ports on your home device, and so if it detects loss of signal on WAN 1, it can switch to WAN 2, and you can use it while they get it back up. I would have loved to have had that a couple weeks ago when I had a root cause issue. Literally, a tree root caused my internet to go down for 2 days.
Wow.
But the thing is, we just expect that, right? Like we're talking about, the building a network for a connected organization. Think about the number of times that you've gone to a food eatery, like a pop-up eatery, and they have the all-in-one square register. It's molded plastic with a touch screen on it, and all you got to do is plug that thing in, either Ethernet or connect it to the Wi-Fi, and it takes care of the rest of the connectivity back to Square's payment methodology. And they don't need to worry about that.
In many cases, they have a backup, right? They'll go over LTE if needed, and in some cases, if you need it, they'll have two LTE, 5G LTE links, and so if one provider's down, the other one's up, depending on criticality, right?
Yeah.
So the devices are pretty smart now.
But Aaron has one real quick.
Yeah. Well, I talked to Jeremy Philbin at Shinog this year, and it's pretty interesting. I'm in healthcare as well, and he is not, right? He is in Hyde in finance that we're talking about. Nanoseconds are too long for his transaction, whereas, I don't know, 6-7 days, probably fine for my side. But obviously, he can never answer his thing to somebody else, right? But I can, sure.
Oh, hold on, Aaron. I'm going to ask, why can he not outsource anything?
Because it's Jeremy.
1 second of downtime, millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars in transactions on top.
So no way to get an SLA that good.
But just write an SLA that says that I can't be down. Somebody will write that SLA. You will not like what it costs, but somebody will write that SLA.
Somebody will pay for it, but no one will ever reach it because there's no one to yell. You can get at your own employees, right? Yell at a provider, but there's another layer of, you don't need that so in there. Or we're going to quadruple your cost because you added that later.
Stick a pin in that because we're going to come back to it in just a second. I wanted Mike to be able to get something in here before I switch the subject a little bit.
Yeah, so I was just going to echo this basically, in that, same CIO said to me, hey, nobody's going to care about your stuff as much as you're going to care about your stuff. And I think that's the fundamental problem that we're hearing here, is that nobody has enough trust in a third party to take over that responsibility, because they know that even if they write the SLA, they probably have no ability to actually execute on it. Even you wouldn't have that ability to execute on it, but you're going to respond a lot quicker because it's your stuff.
It's a critical network, right? I mean, not for your home network, not for the vast majority of the networks out there, which someone probably will run it better than you can, cheaper than you can, potentially.
So I'm gonna say something extremely unpopular to the most of the community out there. To the CTO of your company, there is zero difference between you doing the network and somebody else doing the network. Because to the CTO, you are both third parties. The difference is where you get your paycheck from. Because to the CTO, who answers to the CEO, you're both telling somebody else to do something. The only difference in their mind is, can I yell at this person for not doing it right? And does this person owe me money if they screw something up? Most of the people who are actually totally okay with the network crashing, as long as they get money or compensation of some sort at the end of the day, they would love to outsource because maybe they don't like yelling. But there are people, and I have been on the receiving end of this on a number of times in my career, where if you crater the network or delete a mailbox or something like that, it's not important whether or not it gets recovered. It's that you screwed up and I got to yell at you for it. And how many times have we heard, because Nate, you work for a large VAR, the throat to choke model, right? Hire me because I can be the single throat to choke when something goes wrong. By the way, that is a horrible way to put it. Don't ever do that. But the thing is, people want to blame someone when things don't work. I'm guilty of it too. As soon as my internet went out, the first thing I did was run all of my checks. And now I know where the problem is, so the first thing I do is call the provider. And now I'm mad because the provider doesn't immediately know everything that I know. And they took 2 days to get a truck out there because it went down on a Saturday morning and they couldn't get anybody out until Tuesday morning. But that would it have been better if I had been running my own cable to my backyard and then doing my own tree trimming? Or would it just been a lot of hassle for me to prep for something that may never actually happen? And I think that that's the trap we're falling into, because Roy's point is exactly right. Most people who mess around with their networks don't need to. Yeah. Anybody who's ever complained about why Why does the running shoe that gets released this year have to have a slightly different foam and a different colorway? Why does the phone that gets released this year have a slightly different color on it and a different charging port? Because people love to change things. People feel empowered when they get to monkey with stuff. The buttons on the sidewalks in the average city that allow you to hit the crosswalk button, most of them don't actually do anything. They're there for the comfort of people that want to push buttons.
Feel in control.
I want to feel like I'm in control. Dan?
I was just going to highlight pushing buttons, but since I'm talking, I'm gonna throw something out. One of the things that I've seen a lot as we talk about trying to commoditize this stuff is a lot of organizations view IT as a cost center.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, if we start talking about network as a service, I've been in environments. We built a warehouse. They had a multi-million-dollar budget for the warehouse. Then they're like, hey, you need to put switches there. That comes out of IT's budget. We didn't know there was a warehouse coming. We don't have budget for switches. Your warehouse isn't getting switches. They're like, no, you need to provide them. Well, now they're mad because we went over budget. So maybe as part of your warehouse, you are consuming resources from a network team. Those resources are going to cost you 10 grand a month. Now, all of a sudden, being able to make that conversation of in-house or outsource, if it's going to cost me 10 grand a month to light up a warehouse, do I do that internal? Do I do it external? It's being able to make that, essentially, it's a cost analysis. And then, like you said, who do you yell at? But if you just look at it as, we've got a network team, they've got a budget, I'm going to yell at them when they don't deliver and hold them to the budget that they can't meet because they don't know what we're doing. You're almost put in a position where you can't effectively figure out what that is, what the cost is, what the benefit is.
Ironically, that idea of the internal chargeback for services, I think a lot of companies have got used to it with employees and saying, yeah, you're going to pay however much a year, $800 a year per employee to the IT department to cover the software and the services, the mail server and all, the Office 365 and stuff. I think that's been accepted at the user level, but at the network level, it's not. And then when you try and do that, it's difficult because we're not a single point source commodity, like a user gets a laptop, a license for the software and so on. We're a shared use, and you get into an argument about, well, I don't use as much of the network capacity as they do.
You get 1/48th of a switch.
I mean, we've had similar things in the cloud, right? You try and figure out, how do I bill for Direct Connect? How can I do internal chargeback for that? And people want to know how much data their VPC sent over the Direct Connect in order to apportion that bill back if you're going to try and do chargeback. And you're right, network therefore is seen as a cost center because it's easier to just pay for it.
Jody, what was that point?
I was just saying, take away that access and see how important it is to them.
Well, yeah. and that's the reason I often tell people that the network team, we're kind of like the janitors who clean the restrooms, right? When we're doing our job and everything's working great, no one thinks about you, no one knows your name. When they cut back the funding given to that team, you start cleaning the restrooms maybe 3 times a week and then 2 times a week. And then people start getting really peed off because suddenly there's no toilet paper. Ironic, right? There's no toilet paper or the floor's dirty, and then they're wondering why. And it's like, well, because you didn't want to pay for the cost center.
It's actually a quote from a video game that stuck with me for years. If you've ever played the Old Republic, there's a great scene where one of the intelligence heads is like, we're sanitation workers. We clean up after the users and the executives. And if we do our jobs right, no one will ever know.
Right.
And that's the thing. But when you think about this, compare networking to the other utilities that we use. And I have, God bless, I work with scouts and I ask them what kind of utilities they have in their home. And they're like, I don't know. Air conditioning? How does the air conditioning work? It blows cold air. You're looking for electricity. Electricity and water are your utilities, right? We don't worry about electricity in a building. We don't worry about water in a building. Like if I go out and I decide I want to buy an electric car, I don't worry about the costs of it other than the installation cost of putting the charger in my home, as long as my panel will support that extra voltage, right? Because most houses are over-provisioned a little bit because you can consume additional resource, right? Like everybody who lives south of the Mason-Dixon line knows that my electricity consumption is going to skyrocket from about May through about September because you've got to run, you can't live without air conditioning. The system doesn't care. We don't have to worry about reprovisioning a warehouse and buying a whole bunch of new equipment and doing all this other stuff. Water is the same way. Water consumption goes up or down, but I don't need to worry about repiping the house when I want, unless I want to install a new sink or something like that. If suddenly my kid needs to take 2 showers a day instead of 1, I don't need to completely renovate my kitchen to make that happen. But yet in networking, when someone's like, we're consuming a little bit more bandwidth because we installed this AI agent over here, I'm going to need you to go out and spend $40,000 on brand new switches so that it works a little bit faster. No other utility has to deal with that.
Yeah, but you don't have a shower head that uses 100 times more water because it cleans you better, right? I mean,
because NVIDIA sold me a shower head that suddenly is like, it's dumping the equivalent of a hurricane on me at once.
Exactly. I mean, it's the opposite. In fact, with conservation, right? I mean, you actually use less water and less electricity. I mean, because your 60-watt bulbs have now in LEDs, right? And so aside from a drought and rolling blackouts, you don't usually care about utilities. But on the other hand, on networking, I mean, look at the speeds that we've gone from, 10 megabits to 100 to now we think a gig, no, 2.5 gig, right? M gigs, 10 gig to the desktop. Of course, we need that. I don't know why.
Actually, we don't. And that's the thing.
We don't, yeah.
The campus is pretty much leveled off. Unless you buy like a very specialized workstation to do like video editing, or graphic stuff,
right.
or VR, you get a gig to the desktop. It's the data center where all the stuff is exploded.
That's right.
And 800 gigabit ports, yeah, man, we got those. But it's because the workloads have changed, right? Yeah. And I think that kind of to your point, we're at this inflection point not because networks aren't working. It's because the things that are utilizing those networks at the high end have changed the way that we do networking.
Sure. And I think, going back to that idea that, the network being fundamental to all of this other stuff and whatever's going to happen, right? I mean, I've heard CIOs talking about, having a 1-to-1 ratio of agents to employees at some point in the not very distant future. And at that point, I mean, this is a little bit off topic, but what is the role of the CIO in that world when half of your employees are actually in the machine, right?
Oh, he's going to be
right? And there was a company that recently just combined HR and IT, right? We've seen that already. But anyway, so outside of that, I think the demands on the network continue to evolve, and that's one thing, right? So to Roy's point and yours, right? The water demand of the average building in the average house, the power demand of the average building in the average house aren't going up. But bandwidth demands and latency demands continue to scale. Maybe they won't forever, but they are. And the number of devices continues to scale. So, and I think because of that, that's why we need automation to make this stuff more usable with the same amount of people, right? Because we can't continue to scale the size of the network team algorithmically along with the demands of the network, right? And so you've got to do something with automation, which is how the only reason we can have as many VMs as we have is because we figured out how to use software to run these things, right? I mean, the way a system administrator ran physical servers in a rack in the closet is very different than the way a system administrator runs VMs on AWS today.
It's true.
Or I think we're going through that transition of networking now, a little bit later than they did. And so something is going to change, right? This is going to change. I think the question becomes, to me anyway, is are you willing to invest what's needed now to be able to operate your network the way it's going to have to be operated in the future, or would you rather let someone else do that?
The answer is going to be, I don't want to pay anything right now until it starts misting.
Right, and that becomes this middle road, which I don't think is the right path, right? I think you need to choose, right? Are you going to do this yourself, or are you going to have someone else do it? But I think it has to happen, and if you don't, you're going to run into a wall.
Nate.
So I had an example come up kind of similar to this. It was a conversation we're having, and there's a new retail branches that are getting ready to go online, and the point of contact says, "Listen, I don't want to even think about the network. I don't want to touch a network. I don't want to see a network. What I want is a monthly bill for my network." And one of the solutions that are being offered is, well, it's a variation of network as a service, but it's basically, okay, we'll partner with somebody to come in and deploy all the stuff. You don't own the equipment, but it's going to be there. You're going to pay a monthly fee to use these networking devices to have connectivity. And basically, it's one of those, okay, you're not investing this much money. It's kind of like the cloud mentality where, okay, now you don't have to buy all this stuff because this stuff's in there. Your network's there, but you didn't buy it. You don't have a service contract with it. You don't have a support. Somebody is managing it. But I think there's just like, it's one of those where, kind of like what Roy was saying, there isn't like a one size fits all solution. There's going to be consumption models where one company doesn't want an IT staff. They want a monthly bill. Another one's like, well, it's important enough to me that I need somebody where I don't want to pick up a phone and say, hey, I need you to fix this. I want to tap a shoulder and say, look, this is what's going on. Run down there and check on it.
Yeah. I'm seeing, I mean, physicians group, law offices, accounting offices and all that, even they're going the NAS route, right? Let me just pay someone. And, because we've commoditized networking in a sense, right? I give you, a Wi-Fi 6E, 7, I don't want to worry about that. Someone takes care of that for me. I don't want to call up, Cisco or Juniper or, HP Aruba networking, whatever, right? I just want the problem to go away. And I think we're at a level where, generally speaking, for most use cases, the network stays up, on its own, managed by whatever console, management system, and it's reasonably good. And someone else can take care of that problem for me because I don't really want to own APs or own switches. Someone else should do that for me. Then there are the critical businesses where you really need a network special. You really need a network up, or you want to run it in a special way, and no one's going to come in and, for the money you're willing to pay, say 3 network engineers, give you the SLA that you actually want, right? And so you hire them, right?
Well, and I think that kind of goes to what we were talking about on the podcast. It kind of ties in with that, which is there's an inflection point in terms of size and scale, right? There's a inflection point of saying, you're a law firm with like 20 or 30 offices. That's something that's very, they don't want to deal with it, right? That's not their core competency. It doesn't matter to them. It's a consumption model. They want to have that service to say, hey, we have this here. We get a monthly bill. Then you go down to your enterprise level of other shops that are selling consulting services, for example. They have compliance requirements. They have other demand and supply needs that they need to have that specialization, even if it is just consuming some of the vendor services that are prepackaged, but they're still maintaining that in-house.
Jody had his hand up. Jody?
Yeah, we hope that you kind of raised the point that when you said earlier that the campus network is largely flattened out, everything's gone high-end in the data center and the cloud. It also requires a little bit of rethinking of what do we mean when we say the network,
Right?
because there is no the network. The network from the user perspective is anything that's point A to point B, but there are multiple networks in the middle, all of which have different requirements. We're seeing a lot more automation requirement in data centers and cloud, but on the other hand, in the campus network, we're seeing a lot more simplification. I've had 2 customers in the last 6 months look at me and go, our network needs to be a Starbucks with fewer baristas. And essentially all they're doing there is they're ripping out anything that is complex. They have a primary internet, they have a secondary internet provider, they have fast failover commodity equipment, it's cheap, there's no automation, no requirements for automation, and they move all of that up to the cloud and the data center.
There's actually automation. The cloud management is the automation, right? I mean, your Meraki's, your Mist, whatever it is, there is automation. It's built into software. The cloud manager is the automation. Yeah.
But they're not doing anything.
No, they're not doing anything special. No, correct.
Because there's no requirement for it. They just keep it simple, keep it dumb, and keep all of the security between the endpoint and the data center, or the endpoint and the cloud, and shrink what we consider the network to be.
So one of the things that this keeps kind of popping up in my head was, give or take 4 or 5 years ago now, there was a whole bunch of talk of like open networking and SDN and white box switching and basically everything. He's laughing over there. Everything that kind of, like what VMware did with workloads, like we're going to commoditize the server hardware, which we can debate whether or not nobody's going and building super micros for there's still Cisco and all these companies are still building servers. So we haven't quite got there, but basically there was this big idea of SDN was going to pave the way for, we put in commodity switches and then we just push whatever services down from a cloud managed platform. But it's basically gotten to a point where, well, yeah, we've got Meraki or we've got Mist or we've got insert name of vendor here, which now doesn't like we basically built SDN in a very proprietary way, and kind of like what you were saying earlier with the standards based thing. Okay, if I go with vendor A, even though it's SDN and it's their standards, it's proprietary.
Yeah.
So my ability to, hey, I want to go out of this, I've got to either work with that vendor or now I've got a separate vendor with their own management. Now we're adding complexity because there isn't that kind of simple, unified, here's the open standard for how all of these things play together. We're going to go white box networking someday.
Well, there kind of is a standard. It's the lowest common denominator between all the vendors, right?
Netgear?
Yeah, there you go. No, I mean, this was the big open config problem. It's like, hey, we can have one kind of lingua franca that unifies all of these configurations, and then all your software can talk that, and open config can push it out. It's like, that's wonderful. But this one has a feature that's implemented a different way than this one. This one has a feature which the other one doesn't do. How do you deal with that? And so now we end up back where we are with SNMP, where everything's under the enterprise org rather than under the standard MIBs, because, well, everything's kind of special snowflakey.
OpenFlow 1.2 versus 1.3, which one do you support? Well, they're both OpenFlow. Oh, but they're different.
Which one do you program is probably the more important question.
You shouldn't be programming. I think what we realized with SDN has been there the whole journey from the very beginning to the. It never ended. It just got subsumed into other architectures. I think, Dan, as you pointed out, it is there.
Well, and to be fair, that was kind of the same with OpenFlow, kind of what we told the vendors at the time when they presented, oh, this is wonderful, it does this. We said, but who the hell wants to program that? I don't want to have to write the logic to figure out how to push MAC addresses around on a switch by programming OpenFlow. I need someone to do that.
And so on
I need that as a service.
Agreed. And so on the campus networks, I think as Tom was saying, on the campus networks, the SDN principles and all that are all built in. But we realized, in fact, that the openness of it, or the white box nature of it, wasn't really the problem we were trying to solve. The problem was, I just want a cheap enough, good enough campus networking solution that stays out of the way, so I don't even worry about it, right? I think that's what we wanted, and that's how Meraki and Mist and HP Aruba and all these guys came along and said, oh, okay, does it have to be white box? Customer says, I don't care, right? Just make it work.
And I think that you bring up a good point that I kind of want to turn this conversation into, get back to the original point about that middle path, because I have an idea, and it actually involves the matrix, so work with me here.
I'm scared.
When you think of a modern network, just in your head, when I said that word, what did you conceptualize? Was it looking anything like an enterprise? What does an enterprise look like? We did a podcast about this. I'll tell you that most of those networks look like a dentist office and a law office, and they look like a restaurant. Those networks don't grow because they don't need to. Maybe we added a new server, maybe we added some credit card tip machines. They don't grow. They are the perfect targets for this network as a service model, this build a utility and let it run model. And that's why companies like Meraki went after them. But what about those other companies? You know the ones. When the CEO goes to a trade show and then comes back to your office and walks downstairs and said, this guy showed me this really cool thing and I want to be able to do it in 6 months. And you go, we're not ready for that. Well, I ordered an NVIDIA Haswell cluster. It'll be here next month. And I need you to figure out how to make it work. In the Matrix, they talk about the fact that not everybody accepted that they were plugged into the Matrix. And so the way that they weeded out the people that would crash the system was to give them the illusion of choice. The architect and the Oracle figured out that if you let people think they have a choice as to whether or not they're plugged into the matrix or not, they'll choose whether or not there was actually a choice there to begin with. I would posit to you that the reason why the middle ground exists is for those CEOs that think they have a choice to grow this company 10% year over year for infinity, when in fact, they can't and they won't. Whereas a law office and a doctor's office and a dentist's office are bounded by the number of people who are providing care and the number of people working there. They will never grow 10% year over year for infinity because they are not designed to. But companies that are investing in giant AI clusters, people that are building these robust automation systems, and they're leveraging them to try to open new lines of business. They're leveraging them to try to pivot what the company is doing because this is the shiny new thing over here. And I want to do it because this talking head told me I needed to if I don't want to get left behind. They're the ones that are currently in the middle road. Should they be the doctor's office, the dentist's office, and accept the fact that we're going to stay in business, but we're not going to grow 10% year over year for infinity? Or do they jump to that, we need to make the network a showpiece part because we have to install all of these new GPU clusters to build AI agents, to consume our data, to provide blah, blah. You've heard all of the stories and you know exactly where this leads. A whole bunch of NVIDIA GPUs sitting unused in 6 months because it turns out they either couldn't make the network work, they couldn't afford to run all this stuff with the new increased power costs, or it turns out that there's really no end goal in sight other than just padding NVIDIA's bottom line. Do you think that the middle path is merely an illusion of choice for people who are going to make the wrong choice?
I don't know if they're definitely going to make the wrong choice, but I do think it's somewhat of an illusion. I mean, and actually, some of the things that have come up here is that we're already going down one of these two paths, whether we know it or not, right? And in that,
but as long as the middle exists, I have an off ramp. I can make a different choice.
Yeah.
Even if you can't,
right,
or shouldn't.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because to the points that have been made, right? Like Meraki is somewhat of outsourcing your network, right? I mean, maybe it's not to a bunch of people; it's to a piece of software, which is interesting, right? And then same thing, again, kind of looking at the systems world again, right? There are still systems engineers needed in every company, even though most companies aren't running their own servers anymore. And so I think that's the thing too, is looking at this. How does this evolve? Like whichever path you choose, it doesn't mean that you don't have somebody running a network at your company. I think you still absolutely have to have that. I think what they're doing is, to Jody's point, is they're the ones who are looking at the big picture of, okay, how do I stitch all these networks together? Because I think most modern enterprises, most of the networks they're using, they don't own.
No.
Which is a different problem. That's a very interesting problem, I think. And so then you're abstracting up a little bit. And so I think in any case, there's organizational changes that are needed to recognize how networks work today, which is either, hey, I'm building my own. I want to go as cheap as possible and have as much control as possible. So maybe I do go white box and run Sonic on it and build my own orchestration platform. And I need that because my network's changing and dynamic, and I'm dealing with financial multicast or sub-second ad selling, right, in ad tech world, or there's various reasons where I may need that, and I need to adapt my organizational culture and structure to be able to operate that system. Or I'm looking at this, I'm piecing all these things together, and whether it's Nile or Meraki or Mist or whatever it might be, I've got to figure out a way to build an organization that can manage all of these different networks in a cohesive way. And so I think that's why I think I think there is no middle road at all. It's a false idea. Like, you've got to go down one of these paths. Are you going to be managing systems and managing outsourcing partners and managing the network in that way? Or are you really going to build this thing, roll up your sleeves and build it yourself? And to Jody's point again, there could be different answers in different parts of your network.
I think it's, you're familiar with Wardley maps, right?
Yeah.
Like, you think about, like, that's how I'd think about this. Or just really think about this, what is it that we're doing? Sketch, map down through where are the different parts of it are. So the network's this low-level part of what we do. And is that on the commodity end of the scale, commodity utility, or is that some special, unique thing that we really need to do? And to accept that, like you're just saying there, maybe for different parts of our network, there's different things we should be doing. Like, I think about what we do internally. Say we had traditional on-premises based wireless controller stuff, and it was a massive pain. We moved that over to one of your cloudy platforms. It's fantastic. But for me, the wireless network is it's not an important part of my network. I don't really care about it. The other bits of the network where I'm doing quite a little more interesting things, that's much more custom tooling, our stuff, our things, that sort. And see, which is great though, because like I said, there's other utility bits about it. I don't care. I don't have to touch them. I don't have to. It just works. Basically.
Because both can be the same, right? VAR is a very good example of this. Their internal network can be a commodity, but they can be selling services to somebody else that are a product, like a colo facility that they help cooperate, or the service that they built runs on top of their network and they have to do certain things.
It's kind of funny when you think about that. Like, you could be a VAR and when you're at work, your network, you don't care.
Yeah.
But we're the network experts. Trust us to run your
We used to know that kids have no shoes. For all the networks that we used to put in, ours was actually one of the worst. Jody has his hand up, and then Dan had some thoughts. Jody, go.
So the more we outsource the network and it's not our network, the more we turn back to the matrix and have to face that the truth is that there is no network.
There's no spoon.
Dan.
So kind of like these guys have been saying, one of the things that came to mind was when trying to kind of go through and like teach students what cloud was. And really the biggest thing that I always would come back to is kind of the shared services model, where when you start looking at all the different pieces, all you're doing is you're shifting who takes an ownership of it. And when we start looking at networking, like you've got the hardware, the software, you've got the project side, the operational side. So I've worked for partners, I've worked for managed service providers where, like as an MSP, we'll do the day-to-day operational stuff, but the customer owned all the projects. I've worked in environments where we did all the project work and the customer did all of the engineering like operational work. I've worked with places that have leased hardware, that have owned hardware, that all of these different things. So it ends up being this kind of amalgamation. But the other thing that I think is worth bringing up, because we've touched on the electrical grid quite a bit, and people mention things like electric cars or AC in the summer. When you're going through and you're building something like that, you've got to build for whatever that high water mark is. So if you're trying to build out a data center network, hey, I only need 1 gig today. Like one of my favorite things was always, well, your peak bandwidth over the last 3 months was 1 gig. It's because you only have 1 gig links. So I'm going to sell you 1 gig because that's the most, like, what do you need? Well, hey, there was this one time for half a second that you burst up to 400 gig. We're going to sell you all 400. Nah, we'll sell you 100 gig ports and you can be, that half a second things are slow. But it's trying to find out where those requirements are, where the needs are, what you're willing to let somebody else take the responsibility and risk for, and what you want to keep for yourself.
Nate?
But there's a scaling problem with all of this. And it's funny that we talk about the electric grid, and I'm thinking, well, like my home internet connection used to be 64K ISDN. Now it's 1 gig symmetrical, right? That's like a 1,500 times increase in the past 25 years. That's quite large. I haven't started using 1,500 times more electricity or water in my house over that same period of time. I also haven't had my water and electric supply get end-of-lifed by the vendors, right? And tell me they no longer support my electricity.
Your faucet no longer works.
That's a real problem when you're trying to get any kind of stability in your network, is you are forced. I don't know if I use the expression painting the fourth bridge, right? There's a bridge in the UK, and the joke is that by the time they've painted from one end, by the time they get to the other end and finally finish the job, the start needs to painting again. And it feels like that when we're doing Wi-Fi upgrades and for offices and infrastructure, right? And it's like you never stop.
Nate had something, and then Jody has another thing. So Nate, what's your thing?
So one more like factor in the equation too is also kind of the skills gap that is like continuing to kind of grow with the new and upcoming workforce. We have some clients that say that they're new college grads. They don't even want to touch a CLI. Like, for what? If it doesn't have and not that they want to click around in a GUI, but if I can't talk to that thing through an API, like what?
Yeah.
It's legacy, and we should figure out how to.
Well, we've got prompts for that. I'm going to be a prompt engineer when I grow up. Jody, what was your thought?
Well, that was pursue the idea that we've got people who are coming out of the university programs and like not wanting to touch CLI, not wanting to touch X, not wanting to touch Y. They want a GUI. It's like we've got people coming into the industry that aren't accepting that they have to learn. And this requires that we either shrink things down so the people who do want to learn and do want to do things have less to deal with, or that the other networks that the people who don't want to learn are running are simple. I don't think this is a good path, but it's kind of where we are.
I'm okay if they can do everything via API, if that's what they want to do. It's up to them.
But it requires those APIs to exist too.
Yeah, and on that same note, I mean, we had just recently our automation lead said that the skills gap on automation customers that are looking for their network engineers to also have automation skill set behind them. He said it's unbearable. Like the fact that we're working with customers and trying to implement these solutions and guiding them along this path to where you're going to have this amazing automation experience, but then the people that they employ aren't capable of executing on that vision.
Or as Jody said, they don't want to learn.
Or they don't want, yeah.
I also think, I feel like, in my career, there was this fixed window, size of knowledge that I had to carry. In the last 5-10 years, it feels like stuff off the back isn't falling off. I have that old router that's in the corner over there that nobody touches, and so as these new people come in, they're learning this front end edge of it, and there's a bunch of us that are still doing this, but we're also doing all this now. And that's one of the things I think that's going on is that, is that the people that have been doing this back end of stuff are getting towards the end of the road, and they're going, I'm about done here, and that stuff's still running. And I think that's another problem we have coming. I think, again, at AutoCon, I think it was said, that you guys have a diversity problem here, and it's age. And I think that's the other road we're running into.
But the new people haven't figured out that the APIs that they're using are largely just wrappers for the CLI command.
Yeah.
But I think there's also a degree to which the age thing's an interesting side topic, which is like when I couldn't hook up a scope to an Ethernet signal and tell you if there was a problem at the physical layer anymore, but the people who taught me networking could and did, right? And I just assume Ethernet kind of works, and if it doesn't, I'll change the cable or plug it into a different port, right? And the people coming in now, I learned all about IP and IP ARP and stuff like that, and the people coming in now can't troubleshoot an ARP problem. Why? Because it works 9999, 5 nines of the time. ARP just kind of works okay. And so I think everything, when you come in, you kind of ignore all the fluff that happened before you that the last generation knew intimately, because it just works. And then you move on to the next thing, which is kind of scary, but that's also why you have to have a blended team, really, if you've got any old stuff lying around, because the new people were never taught that stuff.
I think the team structure is a really big part of this. I think, and to your point as well, that it's the team structure, right? It's this idea that you're probably not going to have these unicorns all over the place that are going to understand deeply ARP issues and routing issues, and not just IGPs, but also BGP, and also understand the difference between the switch ASICs and like how to select which switches I want for which applications, and then also know how to build the software on top of it to run it all with the team of the size you actually have. Like that's not one person almost ever. And so that's where this organizational structure, organizational culture, like outcomes-based leadership, a lot of this stuff comes into play, because we need to like rebuild, I think, the way we're approaching networks, especially in large organizations, around these kind of squads that are multidisciplinary, that own a piece of the network, and they've got a systems engineer, and they've got a programmer, and they've got a network person, and they can all work together, because it's not one person anymore. I don't think.
You have to build the network your operations team can run.
Yeah.
And if you want a different network than what they're capable of operating, you need a new operations team.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge that people have, is because for a long time we've just made it work with what we've got, because that's how IT has always behaved. And I think that ultimately is the problem, is that this is not something that can be solved with tech. To Lindsay's point, if you don't know what you need out of your network, how the hell are you going to be able to build it? Does part of it need to be utility? Does part of it need to be a showpiece? Until you can answer that question, you better not pick up a checkbook, and you better not listen to any salespeople tell you to go buy something, because that's how you're going to end up with a whole bunch of stuff you can't use or don't need, a whole bunch of things that your new support and operations staff don't know how to operate and don't care about. And you're going to be right back where you're at right now, sitting in the middle of the road, hoping that you're not going to get hit by a giant bus that says, what are we doing now? SDN, AI, quantum, whatever. The bus is still coming, and you've got to decide, are you going to get to one side or the other so you don't get hit? As you can tell, there's a lot of things going on in the networking space, as boring as it is. And we're very thrilled to be able to bring you all of these great discussions and many more at Networking Field Day and all the other events that we do, because then the networking space bleeds over into mobility, it bleeds over into AI infrastructure. Just check out all the stuff we do at techfieldday.com, and I promise you that there is a discussion going on there that you're going to want to pay attention to. And if you're one of the people that really wants to be around this table, like some of our new folks this time, head over to techfieldday.com, and up in the menu there's a drop down that says Delegate, and you can click the link to say become a Tech Field Day delegate. Fill out some information so that we know who you are, And you might get an email from me wondering if you have time to chat so I can learn a little bit more about who you are. And you never know, you might find yourself sitting here with one of these fine people debating a topic that we bring up in a roundtable. We're going to go.